Welcome back to section 17.2. Here we're going to talk about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. These are your expected learning outcomes for this section. The hypothalamus is a funnel type of an organ that sits in the brain, basically on the floor and the walls of the third ventricle of the brain. It's more of a flattened funnel, like somebody has run over it with a bicycle or something like that. And now it's a flattened funnel that is going to take hormones and release them down to the pituitary. It's going to regulate a number of our primitive functions, from water balance to thermoregulation and even sex drive and childbirth. Many of its functions are going to be carried out by the pituitary. We're going to see that a number of our hypothalamic hormones are going to have a direct effect on the pituitary to send other hormones out to other target organs in the body. The pituitary gland is going to be suspended from the hypothalamus by something called the infundibulum. That pituitary gland sits in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It's a very small organ. It's about the size and shape of a kidney bean. We can divide our pituitary into the anterior and posterior pituitaries. These structures have independent origins, and they also have very separate functions as far as the pituitary gland is concerned. The anterior pituitary is called the adenohypophysis, whereas the posterior pituitary is called the neurohypophysis. The anterior pituitary is going to be about 3/4 of the entire pituitary. It's going to be linked to the hypothalamus by a blood system called the hypophyseal portal system. We're going to have some capillaries in the hypothalamus that are going to connect to some specific capillaries in the anterior pituitary called the adenohypophysis by the portal system. These hypothalamic hormones are going to be regulated by the adenohypophysis cells. These hormones are often what we call releasing and inhibiting hormones, and they are going to travel in this hypophyseal portal system from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. In that anterior pituitary, we're going to have different hormones secreted based on the releasing or inhibiting hormones that are coming from the hypothalamus. If we look here, we have our hypothalamus here, and that hypothalamus is going to connect to the pituitary by the infundibulum. Here we have our anterior pituitary, and we're going to see that these capillaries are going to connect to the superior hypophyseal artery, and they're going to send their hypothalamic hormones down to the anterior lobe of the pituitary. You can see that we have a number of hypothalamic hormones, and they are all going to stimulate specific anterior hormones, hormones in the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary is what we call the neurohypophysis. This is going to be the last 1/4 of the pituitary. Here, we're not going to receive information via bloodstream, but this is going to be nervous tissue. So it's not really a true gland, but it does release hormones. The nerve cell bodies in the hypothalamus are going to pass down that infundibulum into what is called the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal tract. And this is going to end in that posterior lobe. The hypothalamic neurons are going to secrete hormones then that are going to be stored in the neurohypophysis rather than produced in the neurohypophysis. They're going to be released into the blood when we have some kind of signal from the hypothalamus to release those particular hormones. So here we have, again, our hypothalamus, and we have our what we call paraventricular nucleus and our suboptic nucleus. The paraventricular nucleus is going to send that information down the neurons to the pituitary, where it will store oxytocin, and at a particular response will release oxytocin from the posterior pituitary. The supraoptic nucleus is going to produce our antidiuretic hormone, where it will be stored here in the posterior pituitary, and then upon some kind of impulse, will release that antidiuretic hormone to its target organ. We have 8 hormones that are going to be produced by the hypothalamus. 6 of them regulate the anterior pituitary, 2 of them regulate the posterior pituitary. The 6 releasing and inhibiting hormones are going to either stimulate or inhibit the anterior pituitary. The releasing hormones that come from these, the hypothalamus are going to be thyroid stimulating hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and growth hormone releasing hormones. These are going to promote the specific secretion of anterior pituitary hormones, thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and growth hormone. Prolactin inhibiting hormone is going to inhibit the secretion of prolactin and somatostatin. It also is going to inhibit the secretion of growth hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone by the anterior pituitary. These inhibiting hormones will work on a feedback system where it will initiate the negative feedback of some of these particular hormones. We have 2 hypothalamic hormones that are part of the posterior pituitary, and these are going to be oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Both of them, again, are going to be stored in the posterior pituitary. They're not going to be made there, they're just stored there. We have what are called paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. That's going to produce our oxytocin, and then that supraoptic nuclei is going to produce our antidiuretic hormone. Those are going to be sent down the infundibulum to the posterior pituitary, where they're going to be stored until there's some kind of stimulus that activates their release. The anterior lobe of the pituitary synthesizes all of its 6 particular hormones. It also is going to secrete them. 2 gonadotropin hormones that target the gonads are going to be our follicle stimulating hormone and our luteinizing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the secretion of our particular ovarian sex hormones. These are also going to develop the ovarian follicles that will be released during ovulation. And in the male, it will initiate sperm production. Luteinizing hormone is going to stimulate ovulation. It's going to also stimulate the production of the corpus luteum to secrete progesterone. So in case of implantation, it can preserve pregnancy. It also stimulates testes to secrete testosterone in the male. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to stimulate and secrete thyroid hormone, which is going to have a direct effect on the thyroid gland. The antidiuretic hormone that's released from the anterior pituitary is going to stimulate the adrenal cortex to secrete its glucocorticoids. Those glucocorticoids are going to be those stress hormones. Prolactin is going to be secreted, it's going to be produced and secreted after birth, and it's going to stimulate the mammary glands to synthesize milk. Growth hormone is going to stimulate mitosis and cell differentiation in our muscles and in our bones. So when we look, we have the hypothalamus releasing their particular releasing or inhibiting hormones to the anterior pituitary, which will then cause the release of prolactin releasing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, growth hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and then finally luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. The posterior pituitary, we're going to have the paraventricular nucleus. This is going to produce our oxytocin, which will then stream down to the posterior pituitary for storage. Here, our supraoptic nucleus is going to produce our antidiuretic hormone, which again will be stored in the posterior pituitary and wait for stimulation for release. When we have the 2 hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary, their release is going to be stimulated with those hypothalamic neurons are stimulated. Once those are stimulated, then they're going to be released out into their target organs through the bloodstream. Antidiuretic hormone is going to increase water retention. This is going to target our kidneys so that we reduce the volume of urine that we produce. And this will, again, help with the prevention of dehydration. If we are in a state of dehydration, antidiuretic hormone is going to be released from the anterior pituitary. So we stop making urine and we begin to retain water so we don't become further dehydrated. Antidiuretic hormone is also called vasopressin because it has a vasoconstrictive effect on that process. Oxytocin is going to be a surge hormone that's going to be released in a number of different times. We see it during sexual arousal. It also promotes feelings of sexual satisfaction as well as emotional bonding. We can see it being released during labor contractions during childbirth. It's going to be what causes the uterus to push the baby out during childbirth. It also is going to stimulate the flow of milk during lactation. It can also promote some emotional bonding between the lactating mother and the infant. Some of the rates of secretion are not going to be consistent. They're going to be regulated by the hypothalamus, but other brain areas can also feed back to target organs. We can have hypothalamic and cerebral control of some of these hormones. The brain can monitor the influences of the anterior pituitary, and sometimes in times of stress, the hypothalamus is going to trigger the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. And so this is going to be recognized by these fluctuations. During pregnancy, the hypothalamus triggers the release of prolactin. So again, this only happens during this particular time in the human system. The posterior pituitary is going to be controlled by what we call a neuroendocrine reflex. This is going to be a nervous endocrine type of response. The hypothalamic, what we call osmoreceptors, are going to trigger the release of a antidiuretic hormone when they detect a rise in blood viscosity. Our blood is becoming thick because we don't have enough water in our blood. Also, the infant suckling triggers hypothalamic response of the release of oxytocin, so you can continue to produce milk. These hormones have a negative feedback effect, and these are going to essentially target a hormone level and inhibit the release back to the hypothalamic or the pituitary hormones. A good example of this is the thyroid hormone. Thyroid is going to inhibit the release of thyroid releasing hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone from the hypothalamus and pituitary respectively. If we look at this diagram, we're going to have thyroid releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus and have an effect on the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is going to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which is going to cause the thyroid gland to release our thyroid hormones, and it's going to hit its target organs. Once we have a sufficient activation of thyroid hormone, that thyroid hormone now is going to feed back on the pituitary and onto the hypothalamus to shut down thyroid releasing hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone. We do have positive feedback that can occur when we have activation of labor, where the uterus begins to stretch, the baby begins to push down onto the cervix. The stretching and pressure onto the cervix is going to cause a release of oxytocin. Oxytocin is going to travel up to from the pituitary gland down to the uterus, where it will attach to uterine receptors, which initiate more stretching, more pressure on the cervix, which is then going to activate our release of oxytocin again. And this is going to be this positive feedback loop, which is going to cause an increase in that activation until we have the delivery of the baby. And once that happens, there's no more stretching, no more pressure on the cervix, and oxytocin release shuts down. Okay, that's the end of 17.3. The next section, we're going to be looking at the endocrine glands.